Yo, what is up guys, Dream here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the fastest build in Path of Exile's history. The build that you're looking at in the background right now, Tornado Shot Lightning Warp, which has been around for a few leagues now, but not like this, not anywhere close as fast. And the reason we're at this point and with this build in 322 is thanks to a user called Captain Garbage, who gave the build to Crouching Tuna, whose build you're seeing in the background here, a hyper-optimized version, and he's been spreading it to the masses by streaming it and telling us all how it works. Now there's a few other streamers and players who have picked up on this and now they're also running the build, but it's fair to say it's a complete beast and it blows the socks off the speed limit we've previously seen in PoE's history. And the shocking thing is, the footage you're seeing in the background here isn't even as fast as the build can go. It can go much faster, it's just that the build is just so hard to control. That's how fast it actually is. And all of the movements are instantaneous, so it's definitely a little bit challenging. In this video, we're going to go over how the build works, and you can recreate a similar effect, albeit be warned, the build is insanely expensive, and also what it's good at farming, and maybe a few downsides of the build as well, and then finally, whether this thing is going to be nerfed, because all other builds this fast have fallen by the wayside, thanks to the GGG assassination hit squad taking them out real quick, like Valspark, Val Fireball, Cast on Crit Discharge, all of them gone. So we'll have to see. Let's get into it. So the build makes use of arguably one of the best clearing skills in the game, Tornado Shot, and it does so with full investment in mind. So crazy bows, quivers, many projectiles, the works. But if you can set this up, each tornado shot you shoot will pretty much have the effect of clearing the entire screen. Normal, magic, and rare monsters included. So this pretty much fully takes care of the clear, and every single shot you fire will basically instantly delete, for the most part, most of the screen. So that just leaves mobility. And traditionally, tornado shot builds make use of a ton of movement speed. However, that's not so much the case with the Lightning Warp variant you guys saw in the background, instead opting for mass and instantaneous teleportation using Lightning Warp. So how on earth do they achieve that effect? Well, it's actually incredibly simple and was there in front of us all along. So the first component of achieving this is the Asenath's Mark helmet, which will trigger a spell whenever you cast a bow attack, and you place Lightning Warp in the Asenath's Mark, and then you'll trigger Lightning Warp whenever you use a skill. So that'll support us around whenever we use a bow skill, which gives you the effect that we just saw. Now, the downside of this is that first and foremost, Lightning Warp has a delay to it, because you need to warp to a location. Now, fortunately, this is easily solved by getting enough reduced duration throughout the entire passive tree and also on the skill gem itself. You can get this very close to or at 0, so it's instantaneous like you were seeing in the video that we just saw. So that's the first problem, which can be solved. To give you an example of the stat that you're looking for, you can get it here on the skill tree, window of opportunity here. Unfortunately, the next piece of the puzzle isn't so easily solved, and it's the reason we haven't seen this build move anywhere near as fast as earlier until Captain Garbage brought the min-max to the table. And that is lowering the cooldown recovery of the Asenath's Mark to the point in which you can warp as fast as what we saw in the footage. Now, how can you do this? Traditionally, Asenath's Mark has a hard limit of 0.3 seconds, so roughly around 3 warps per second. And in order to lower this, there's only one stat that can help, and that is cooldown recovery. However, this is very limited. There's not really too much of it on the passive tree, really anywhere to speak of, and it's only on very niche pieces of gear, and those pieces of gear are generally influenced or unique in nature and a little bit tough to acquire. So how do they get so many warps then? Well, fortunately for us, there's a bit of a special interaction between Lightning Warp and Asenath's Mark. If we take a Lightning Warp gem and we socket it into my gloves here, and we take a look here, you'll notice that it doesn't have a cooldown. It just has a cast time, which you can see in the top right there. But when we socket it into Asenath's Mark, it actually gains a cooldown here. What's happening here is that it's gaining the cooldown from Asenath's Mark, and that's becoming the cooldown of the Lightning Warp trigger in the helmet. Now, why this is important and why it's so powerful is that this is considered a travel cooldown, even though it's a triggered ability from Asenath's Mark, meaning we can lower the cooldown of it with travel-related cooldown recovery, meaning you can get the Lightning Warp cooldown incredibly low, and you're essentially cheesing and breaking the interaction of Asenath's Mark and bypassing the restriction which keeps it balanced, which is of course exceptionally crazy. So there's these two nodes here on the skill tree, but there's also an item like Badge of the Brotherhood, which gives you 10% cooldown recovery per frenzy charge you have. And these builds get around 8 frenzies, so that's 80% cooldown recovery just from that alone. Overall, you're going to be shooting for around 200 or a little bit more, but if you're interested in the exact details of that, I'm going to post a TLDR from Tuna and Captain Garbage for you guys to enjoy. Now, if you're going full min max like they are in the footage and getting enough travel cooldown recovery, you can get roughly 10 warps per second, achieving the effect that we saw earlier. Now, there's one final hurdle to get there though. You need to attack fast enough to trigger the lightning warp fast enough. Remember, you need to use a bow attack in order to warp, so you need to be attacking roughly 10 times per second. And that is no mean feat in order to achieve. You need a crazy bow and you need to have a ton of attack speed in order to get there. And you need to make sure you balance that just right. Because if you attack too fast, you're going to end up missing cooldowns on your Asenath's Mark. If you attack too slow, you'll also miss cooldowns. So you need to line up your attack speed just right to ensure it's perfectly in sync with the Asenath's Mark cooldown, and then you're going to get that nice smooth warping that you saw in the footage. Now this all sounds like a massive headache to figure out, and fortunately Captain Garbage and Crouching Tuna have exact breakpoints on cooldown recovery as well as attack speed. And if you want all that, you can find a little bit of a link down below to some quick notes, but most importantly, Crouching Tuna is making a full guide for us over on his YouTube channel. So go check out the link down below and subscribe to his channel if you're interested in making this build work and you want that guide. Now, for the remainder of the video, we're going to be talking pros and cons, and what content this build actually farms, and whether or not this thing's going to get nerfed. And I interviewed a ton of players, including Crouching Tuna himself, in order to understand what this build is capable of. Alright, to round us out here, I've got 3 pros and 3 cons that were mentioned most from the people playing this build. First up, the pros. The movement speed, of course, is the biggest pro. You can literally teleport across the map in mere seconds, even if it's a big map. And those are teleports, not running, meaning you can get over gaps, no issues. The next thing is movement speed isn't really as needed. It's nice, especially when you're looting, but it's not as needed on this build because you just teleport. So it means you have better options on gear for the most part. You don't need to pick up movement speed passives on the skill tree, which some ranges do choose to do. And you also don't need specific movement speed uniques like Death Rush. It also means you can use more diverse utility flasks because you don't need stuff like the Quicksilver flask, which can be a big benefit letting you run stuff like Ruby and Topaz flasks instead. In addition to that, while you're teleporting, you're also not considered moving, which means you can run stuff like Arctic Armor and take full advantage of all of its benefits, which means you have a lot more options for defense. To balance us out here and keep us grounded, we've also got a few cons. Now, the first one is an honorary con and doesn't count, but a lot of people say that the build is maybe too fast. Remember, you warp wherever you shoot, and those warps are quick. So it can get a little bit confusing moving around that quickly, and ensuring you bring out the full potential of the build is very tough. A lot of people compare it to a more controllable version of Flicker Strike, so just keep that in mind if you're gonna invest. Now, the first real con we come across here is the price tag. Now, you can take a look at Crouching Tuna's Pee-wee Ninja, I'm going to link down below, but it is definitely not cheap. His profile has, at the bare minimum, a Power Charge Enchanted Tornado Shot helmet. It has a synthesized Power Charge ring, and this is all on top of having decent bow gear so you can actually kill monsters with Tornado Shot. So definitely be ready for a pretty high price tag to get the results he was, but it might be possible to do something similar on a lower budget. You'll have to check out his guide. Now, con number 2 is that you can't really run any conditional attack speed buffing items. The reason for that is it'll mess up your cooldown recovery breakpoints with Lightning Warp and make your Lightning Warp all choppy. So that means items like Headhunter, Inspired Learning, and even stuff like Acceleration Shrines and Rampage might not be advisable. So definitely exercise a bit of caution and testing when you do tackle those items there. So the third and final con here is you actually do indeed teleport wherever you shoot. And the optimal way to play Tornado Shot is to shoot just behind the boss for maximum damage. Now, if you do that on this build, you're going to teleport behind the boss, and that can get pretty quickly very dangerous. So a lot of people do use a few strategies. Now, you can just fire on the boss and teleport on them over and over again, and that is just fine. But some players move around the boss by teleporting around in circles around them. That'll hit most of the Tornado Shot projectiles and is a pretty solid strategy. And the final one I've seen people do is teleport into a wall and shoot the wall and then use the Deadeye Ricochet Ascendancy, which allows arrows to chain off the wall to then have those chain back into the boss, which does pretty big damage as well. And that's what Tuna's using in the beach boss room here. So overall, that said, the pros are definitely huge, but there's also a few cons to consider. But what content is this being used for? What's it best for? Well, it definitely is best for mapping and invitation rotors, anywhere it can exercise its full power and full speed potential. You're seeing it in some boss rush maps in the background here, and it's going to be just as good at invitation rotors where you also rush the boss. So definitely keep that in mind as well. I'm not sure that you'll have as easy time doing stuff like bosses in Sanctum, because some of that stuff can be a bit touch and go if you can't perfectly dodge them. But if you're a god gamer with your teleports, I imagine it's going to be just fine. But overall, that's what we're looking for farming. Fast strat is going to be best. Now the final question here is it gonna get nerfed? So my gut feeling is that probably not immediately. It's going to be good for the league, I have to imagine. Now, when it comes to next league, I imagine we might see a bit of an adjustment. The way that cooldown works with socketed skills is not consistent, and even some jewels also make it a bit funky. We've seen this in the past with Discharge, its Threshold Jewel, as well as Crafts on the bench, which allow you to trigger it faster. It's overall a bit of a mess, and I imagine that GGG is eventually going to get around to fixing this and making sure that cooldowns don't inherit in any wacky ways. Now, whether that's next league, not sure, but I imagine it will be eventually. So play it while you can and enjoy this absolute divine beast while it's still as fast as it is. Remember, go check out Crouching Tuna's guide. Big shout out to Captain Garbage for showing us the build, and all the other streamers playing it. I'd say go check out Empyrean as well. He's playing a pretty cool version of it as well. Alright, hope you guys have enjoyed this video and this showcase of the build. Until next time, cheers.